Okay, we're going live in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Happy, what is it, Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday.
Nobody knows during quarantine.
Guys, this has been such a beautiful week for me. So I got to interview Esther Perel on Wednesday of last week, and then I turned 39 over the weekend. And then
happy birthday.
Now I got to, thank you. Now I get to interview you. So two of like huge heroes in my life. And it's really like my favorite thing in the world to have conversations with the people who really like touched and impacted my growth journey.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
So thanks so much for being here. So I wanted to start with your story. We'll kind of get into the work that you do a little later on, but would love to just have you share a little bit about your background and some experiences that led you into what's called a fearful avoidant attachment style.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm assuming everybody knows a little bit about attachment styles on your platform. And so I was a very fearful avoidant attachment style individual. And I think that largely was in part to just a lot of violence, a lot of fighting in my home growing up as a kid, and just a lot of toxicity. My parents were in, I think, one of the longest divorces in Canada. And my father was sort of in and out of jail around it. And there was just a lot of stuff going on. So I went through like a lot of really intense tumultuousness growing up. And I think there wasn't like an outlet for me to understand. And so, I saw that as normal. I thought, everybody probably has a lot of family problems that they sort of shove under the rug. And I didn't really have tools to like process what I was experiencing. And I also had both my parents like really coming to me a lot, like for like emotional support. I think they both valued sort of keeping things in the home and saving face. And I think I sort of became like, okay, well, we can talk to our child because she's going through this. And so I definitely was very enmeshed at a very young age.
Yeah.
And by the time I was 14 years old, I had a knee surgery and I was an athlete, and I knew that the household wasn't, the best space. And I had this really strong internal goal. And by the way, like my parents are both very loving people, but they definitely had just a massive trauma bond. Like, and I have a great relationship with them now, and we've done lots of work and
Guys, I'm going to have you define trauma bond a little later on, but keep going.
Okay.
In case people are unfamiliar.
Absolutely. So basically it sort of led myself into a space where I was like, I'm going to get a full soccer scholarship and go to the United States. And, I'm from Toronto, Canada. And I had a really bad knee surgery when I was 14. And I just got addicted to my painkillers after. Like, I didn't even know what addiction was. I just knew like, oh, this makes life easier. And this feels And there was somebody in my school who was a year or two older, and she was selling them to me. And she's like, oh, they're also performance enhancers when you come back. And so it just started this like really intense spiral in relationship to addiction. So I sort of had like the fearful avoidant and the opiate addiction at the same time. And I tried a lot of things. I was like, I'm going to go through the Western healthcare system. I'm going to, I did therapy, I did rehab, I did all these different things, and nothing was working. And it was really disheartening and really scary for me. I remember going to like AA meetings and NA meetings and seeing people like get tokens on like day 100 of sobriety, and they're in their 30s and they're like, today was a battle. And I just remember thinking like, I'm too young for this. Like, I'm going to be battling every day for my whole life. I couldn't accept it. And through the grace of God, honestly, I came across a mentor, like somebody who just shared with me a little bit about the subconscious mind. And it like really depicted this inner struggle where, every day I'm like, this is the last time, I'm not going to do this again. And then every day you're, chewing the painkillers or putting them up your nose or all these things. And so it's, to hear somebody say, oh, the conscious mind can't outwill or overpower the subconscious mind was like, this is my experience. This is my everyday, like trying to say consciously, this is the last time. And then every day going back to this painful space where I feel helpless to myself and out of control and keep repeating the same patterns and habits. And so that led me on this like huge journey. And I ended up doing a master's degree in transpersonal psych, and then 13 different certifications. I'm on my 14th now, and really just trying to like understand everything about change from the subconscious level. And so when I did a whole bunch of research in attachment theory, I recognized like, wow, this has so much to do with our subconscious programs. And if we don't address our attachment style from the subconscious level and work to reprogram those things, then it's very limiting. And, I think because of sort of the wound of seeing my parents fight and go through so much, I was very, very interested in relationships and attachment and what that all comes down to once I had sort of transformed my own not so great relationship with addiction. So all of it ultimately served profoundly because I got to learn about the mind and what it takes to be happy and fulfilled and how to reprogram things that don't serve. And so it's been a not easy journey, but a really beautiful one.
Thank you for sharing. It's funny because, so I discovered you probably back in May of this year. So I had reached out to a relationship coach who I really respected. He had done a Facebook Live. I'd been listening to his podcast. All of his ideas were really resonating. And I reached out to him because I had just had the same experience that I really always have in connection, which is I'm very, very rarely attracted to people. But when I am, it's overwhelming. Like it's a 10 activation. And what I find is I kind of have this dangerous knack for like really escalating the connection very fast. So I feel it deeply almost too soon. And they probably feel it deeply too soon. And then it just combusts.
Yes.
So, it's funny because like relationships are my passion. I founded and lead this group. I'm like filled with information about relational skills, conscious mind. But my subconscious mind it's like super activated.
At times.
Yeah. And so I ended up having a conversation with him, and I had always thought I was anxiously attached.
Yeah.
But we both know if you're anxiously attached, it's pretty uncommon that you like wouldn't have had a long-term relationship for the first 40 years of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I discovered is that my mom became severely manic very suddenly when I was 13. And I kind of have this way about me where I'm very like, okay, let's get this done, take charge. And I kind of became her mom and my mom at that age and like have been ever since. Yeah. And what I realized is I've really I don't remember anything from my high school years. Like I've been talking to my dad and my sister, and apparently like my mom almost missed my bat mitzvah, and she left me and my sister at an airport for several hours when we were really young. And like, I don't remember any of this. And so I had always like been struggling with like, why do I have this much relational knowledge and this much struggle in relationships? And I could never figure it out. And I had had a couple like really painful experiences with ghosting. And so I always thought, well, maybe it's the ghosting experiences. But this coach had helped me see like, no, it's related to, what had happened, the sudden loss in connection with your mom. Yeah. And so he shared, I really think you're fearful avoidant. And I had no idea what that was. I had read attached, but they kind of
avoid it altogether in there. I've heard, yeah.
So I Googled it, and like you were the first person that came up, and it's just been so transformational to take in your content and to be a part of your community. So just wanted to share so much gratitude, and I've learned so much about myself, and I've really been an evangelist for your work because there's so many people who are in our community in the Esther Perel Discussion Group who are like bumping up against the very same things that I am. And to have like this one-stop shop that addresses like all of the elements that we keep running into has been really incredible. So I just wanted
thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And it's really beautiful to hear your journey and what you've gone through and how you've sort of found your way out.
Yeah, thanks.
Beautiful.
Okay, so there are
everybody joining. I see everybody from Costa Rica and Netherlands. And thank you.
Yeah. We're a super international community. In fact, when we do our women's groups, we do them Saturdays at 1:30, and we'll have like people in Australia. It's like 4:30 a.m. and they're like joining the call.
Showing up. That's amazing. That's amazing.
So a lot of people are familiar with attachment styles. There are some people in the group who aren't as much. And there are also some people, some contrarians, who are a little bit like, I don't know about that. So can you overview attachment theory and the different types, how the styles form, and then how the styles can move more towards secure?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's 3 insecure attachment styles and there's 1 secure. And secure is obviously what we're trying to move towards. And so securely attached individuals, basically in their early childhood, or at least throughout the course of their life repetitively enough that it imprints the subconscious mind, they have a healthy relationship to their caregivers, namely under the categories of when they cry or express emotion, they're tended to and they feel attuned to as a byproduct of that, which gives the emotional inference essentially to a young mind that my feelings are worthy of being seen, heard, validated, and expressed. And then there's this other part where if they also express a need, or if they express emotion, a need is met. So for example, if they cry, maybe they're fed, maybe the parent really tries to attune and wonder what need they have. And so there's this other piece of messaging that says, your needs are inherently worthy of being met and understood, which creates like this really strong belief in one's own self-worth, because we go, oh, me as I am receives unconditional love. Me just crying, me just expressing needs, this gets met. And so this individual usually goes on the trajectory in their life of feeling worthy, and that it's healthy and fair and safe to express boundaries and feelings and needs. And they're not emotionally repressed or in any state of really strong coping around those things, which ultimately leads them to be able to hold the same space for others as was held for them, because they believe this is a normal part of relating. And then they go on to have more thriving and flourishing relationships. So that's our securely attached individual. And then when it comes to our insecurely attached individuals, we have our anxious, we have our anxious preoccupied, we have our fearful avoidant, which is also sometimes referred to as disorganized or anxious avoidant, and we have our dismissive avoidant. And you can sort of imagine it's like in a way along a continuum. And I like to compare our attachment style to like the rules we have to relate. And these rules are programmed into us at the subconscious level. And so the analogy I often give to people is it's like if you have a different attachment style, it's like playing a board game with somebody and you have a different rule book. Like obviously you're going to run into unnecessary challenges and problems and confusion, which is basically what happens in our adult romantic relationships. Yeah. And so on the one side of the spectrum, we have our anxious preoccupied, and these are sometimes the individuals that we'll see really need to be in a relationship, often are sometimes codependent in their relationships, go back into back-to-back relationships, really don't like being alone. And the reason for this is in their early childhood or upbringing, there's usually some big inconsistency. So it can be that they have caregivers who are really loving, but they work a lot. And so they, the child feels like, oh my gosh, there's this abandonment emotionally taking place throughout my life. Or it can also be that one caregiver is very warm and another is cold. And the juxtaposition of that triggers this biological fear of abandonment we all have. And so that the repetition of that creates programs in the subconscious mind, like fear of abandonment, fear of being alone, maybe associations that being alone or abandoned equals I am unsafe. And then the approach to that is to try to soothe through others and sort of cling and attach very strongly. And so sometimes we'll see these individuals in their adult lives, calling repetitively or not being able to let go of relationships, or really fearing being alone, staying in relationships for too long, that maybe it's time to leave and they know, but the fear of leaving is too great. So they stick around. Yeah. These sorts of dynamics. And then on the exact opposite sort of end of the spectrum there, you have your dismissive avoidant. And these individuals basically went through some form of emotional neglect that was consistent enough that the idea, even though we're biologically wired for attunement and emotional closeness, the idea of trying to connect to a caregiver and be vulnerable and express emotions, when it's rejected so repetitively, that pain just became too great. And so this individual just learned to totally dismiss their own caregivers and push them away and learn to self-soothe. And that's where they found some kind of relief. So that emotional neglect makes these subconscious associations in this child's mind that says vulnerability equals I'm not safe. Yeah. Expressing emotions only gets me rejected. Trying to connect and bond doesn't feel good because my needs are not met. And these things, it's really interesting for dismissive avoidance, can even be like very overlooked. A lot of dismissive avoidance will be like, I had the an idyllic childhood. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And sometimes their needs are like met physically,
Yeah.
and they're cared for and cooked for, and, their clothes are laid out. But if there's no emotional attunement or emotional bond, that's a very important part of a child that needs to be nurtured. And so if there's a lack of that, then this individual basically goes into their adult lives with these programs that say, vulnerability isn't good. It's not safe to get close to others. And they often infer through that experience that, well, something must be wrong with me and my emotions. And so they often carry these like defectiveness wounds, or experiences of feeling really ashamed, and they push people out whenever that wound is triggered. So what we often find is that these individuals can often like attract each other in a relationship. Dismissive and anxious often are in relationships together, which like you can only imagine the rule books people have and are playing with, and how that impacts the relationship dynamic, where one person is always hungering for closeness and another person is always hungering for distance and space. And it can really create a lot of painful cycles. So our last attachment style, and I like to explain this one last because it can be the most complex, but it basically experiences as the fearful, avoidant, or disorganized. And they experience both sides of the attachment spectrum. So they experience the anxious side, and they also experience the avoidant side. Now, this individual usually goes through some sort of like tumultuousness in childhood, some sort of trauma, or things that really break like trust and connection to a caregiver. And this is sort of like the cornerstone of fearful avoidant. And so they can also be loved by their caregiver through this form of enmeshment, or they can take on some kind of responsibility emotionally for their caregivers as well. So what we often see is that fearful avoidance, if they have trauma, if they have, a huge change, like you had a trauma at 13 and you lose that bond with your mom, and it's like, you lose that trust as a byproduct of that as well, even though your mom doesn't intend that or anything like that. It's like, well, geez, if I can't trust my caregiver, how can I trust somebody in an adult romantic relationship? Fearful avoidants often go to great lengths to like protect themselves, and they experience the anxious side of the spectrum, like because they have some positive associations to connection. So they want the closeness, and they fear the abandonment and being not good enough or being rejected. But at the same time, they have that really strong avoidance side where they can carry a lot of shame, feel unsafe, feel like something is wrong with them, or they're unworthy of love. And so they carry a whole bunch of wounds, really combined with trust wounds as well, and fears of being trapped, helpless, powerless, these sorts of things. And so they sort of have this combination of all these wounds in conglomeration together. And they often go into relationships and appear in their adult lives as the person who goes, come close. And then somebody gets close and they're like, get away from me, stand back. And they really can be that like hot and cold partner. And I don't mean like warm and cool partner. I mean like hot, like really, like you said, have a huge knack to get close and build bonds with people, and then be very shut down and very cold. And that can be because they can feel engulfed by enmeshment. It can be that they get triggered very easily around trust and just feel the need to shut down and protect themselves and push people away. And they're constantly sort of swinging from the anxious to the avoidant side, which can be really tough, honestly. Like if you're that person, and you and I have both had that internal experience, it's like you can't just relax in a relationship. And so there's like this need to get closer, need to push away further, need to get closer, need to push away further. And it can be a really challenging inner experience. And it often manifests at times as like emotional volatility that outpours, where, if your needs are not met and you haven't been speaking up about them, somebody can trigger you and you can feel, very frustrated, and a lot of emotion can come out. But fearful ones usually carry a pattern of not speaking up for a very long time, not having boundaries, because they learn to love through enmeshment. And then when they do speak up, it usually is quite intense if they do, until they learn to really regulate and work through their core wounds and express their needs. So those are the attachment styles.
It's so interesting because I had shared like a little nugget of this on your last Ask Me Anything live Q&A. But I mean, talk about like triggering all of your stuff. So I'm going through an experience now. It has like all of the elements of the personal development school. So I've been seeing a guy who's not necessarily in a polyamorous relationship, but he's poly, his partner's monogamous, and they're trying to kind of negotiate this difference.
Wow.
And he and I have just had the most explosive connection. Both, I think his personality needs bucket for emotional intimacy has been really empty. And I'll share more why in a second. My bucket in that area has been empty too. my bucket in the area of physical intimacy has been really empty. And I think that my style of physical intimacy is very different from his other partners. So we're just like really meeting each other's needs.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that I felt so drawn to him is because I've had a lot of dismissive avoidant partners. And he is like rock solid secure. And it just felt so safe. And that's when I like really like unleashed the inner world.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize is that his partner is super dismissive avoidant. And because they're the established couple, it's like when conflict arises, he is going to kind of defer to her. And so I went from feeling like really secure and safe, and then I unleashed. And now it's like I'm in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant.
Wow. Wow.
So we had like a moment of conflict in terms of she doesn't have very clear awareness of her boundaries. And so she tends to go along with the flow, kind of like people pleasing, and then feels a violation and gets triggered. Yeah. And so her need when she gets triggered is space and silence.
Yeah.
And I have the opposite need. I need connection and I need conversation. And we need to like talk about what's going on. And again, the man that I'm seeing is like deferring to her because she's the primary partner and they live together and they need to kind of keep the peace. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's been super activating.
Wow. And so are you noticing, I mean, I think it's a really powerful experience to go through because it's, you know, one of the things I really believe about relationships is they're showing you to yourself. So anything that's unhealed, anything that's unresolved, I mean, that's a very challenging situation, more so than like your average experience, but it's really going to show you like anything that needs healing, that needs love, that needs connection in relationship to self first, so that it'll be more easily resolved. But good for you for going through that experience. And are you finding yourself regulating well, or where are you at with it?
Well, there's an additional level of complexity because I think that their philosophy of consensual non-monogamy is very hierarchical. So it would almost be like they decide what they're comfortable with, and they like present the third with terms. And the idea that someone would like tell me how I can experience my body is just so foreign to me and just not acceptable either.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that we're not a match, the three of us. I think I could certainly be a match with the guy, but if he's really going to defer to his partner, not a match.
Yeah. Good for you for like really getting clear about those boundaries and like your body and everything else. It's
Thanks. Good. There was one other thing I wanted to add as you were talking about dismissive avoidance, since I have a lot of experience in that area. I just wanted to add that I think the most confusing part for me is I would feel such a strong personality connection, and there was clearly a physical connection. And so it can be really confusing when both of those things are there, which are often the things like when you think about like love and connection, they talk about like, well, you jive on a personality level and there's sexual attraction. But again, with my knack for like, I'm a very vulnerable person. I love intimacy. I love being super like shown, yet seen. Yeah. And didn't realize that that's like the most triggering thing in the world for a dismissive avoidant. And so it's often like, it can be very confusing when you're dating a dismissive avoidant because, you know, there's like that book, like He's Just Not That Into You, which I feel like is so kind of like such a cruel message to send and such a like deceptive message to send because that's not what's going on. And so I just wanted to make sure that people listening heard that, like not to personalize it when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, there's sort of points to hit. Like obviously there can be people who aren't as interested in connection, but the really easy way to tell the difference is like dismissive avoidance will show up and they will connect and they will bond in the early stages. And they can be quite charismatic and charming in the dating phase of a relationship. And that can be another confusing thing for people, is that they can start off and then, the honeymoon phase happens, and every relationship has a life cycle that involves 6 major stages. But we can get into a space where it's like honeymoon, and then by the time we get into a power struggle phase, and for dismissive avoidance, it can happen a bit earlier because they can really want to keep their identity and sense of self to stay safe. But what we'll see is that it's like the person suddenly pivots, like they just seem to change all of a sudden. And this person that you are having this connection building with, once it reaches a threshold for the dismissive avoidant, they pull back. And then what's really tough is that there is a lot of messaging out there that doesn't take attachment styles into account, or doesn't know about attachment styles or attachment theory. And then it goes, oh, like the person's, a jerk, and just manipulate them this way and get this in response. And we can get messages that are actually clouding the problem instead of being able to peel the layers back and resolve the problem at the subconscious core. And so you're absolutely correct in the fact that A, it can be really challenging to be with a dismissive avoidant, but B, sometimes we get the wrong messaging that, somebody's not into you, or you're not interesting enough or good enough, or things like that. And that's not necessarily the case. And I would say in most cases, if you've built momentum in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, they are very much interested. They just have these competing needs coming up of fear of vulnerability and fear of safety. So if they're an 8 out of 10 interested in you, but then they have 7 out of 10 fears, you only seem like you get the net one of a person, right? And so that's sort of the internal world of a dismissive avoidant that you're competing with in a way.
Yeah. I love that net example. I've definitely shared it with members in the group. It was so helpful for me, because a person can have a level 10 interest, but if their fear is a level 1, the net is not a great relationship.
Yeah.
There was actually a group member question about dismissive avoidance. So she said, after reading the book Attached, the authors appear to take a strong view against dismissive avoidance, really hammering home that they are not the ideal relationship partners, and that to make it work, you need to sacrifice a lot. Thais seems to take a more compassionate view, and she was interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I love that. So I am a huge advocate, I want to say first, before I share my answer, of boundaries in a relationship, and of healing, and of doing the work, and of not putting up with something that doesn't work. And I think that that's extremely important, and that's an act of self-love. What I also find is the more healing and introspection we do with ourselves, the easier it is to be able to go, I'm walking away from something that's not serving. Personally, I have been in a long-term relationship, just under 6 years, with a dismissive avoidant that I would say is very, very successful, and I'm extremely happy. And I didn't know his attachment style. We were doing long distance. I was really busy with my business. I didn't even realize what his attachment style was until, months into the relationship. I wasn't really thinking about it to that degree. And when I did, I set this internal boundary with myself, and I said, okay, I know what some of the challenges are going to be. I'm going to show up. I'm going to communicate my needs. I'm going to be very clear. I'm going to ask for vulnerability. I'm going to see if he does the work. And if he does, and if he shows up, then we can probably work this out. But I'm going to set a deadline ahead of time. So, 3 months of trying to move the needle.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't see somebody's attachment style very clearly until, later into the relationship dynamic. So sometimes we have this problem we get presented with, which is are we going to try, or are we just going to walk away over somebody's attachment style? And I think most people are going to want to try if they've already built in a connection. And so I set that deadline, and he showed up and he did the work, and it wasn't easy, but it was extremely powerful for me, because I realized how much I wasn't fully expressing my needs at times, even though I thought I was.
Yeah.
And it helped me dial in and grow. And I think that that's really the approach, which is, yes, it can be challenging, but we can say that about any insecure attachment style. Being with an anxious preoccupied can be challenging. Being with a fearful avoidant can be challenging. We could say that anywhere. And what really matters, and what I've seen in my practice historically very clearly, is let's say 2 people come in, and they can be extreme dismissive and extreme fearful avoidant. But if both parties are motivated, and they're willing to look at themselves, and they're willing to show up for themselves and communicate vulnerably, and they're willing to do some reprogramming work, I've seen all of those relationships work very powerfully. And then I've seen people who are a little anxious and a little dismissive, but they don't want to do the work, and they just expect the magic wand to be waved. And then those relationships are unsuccessful. So I wouldn't get too much. We want to remember everybody, whether it's dismissive or fearful avoidant, what we're seeing from a person that might be unhealthy in a relationship dynamic is based on pain. It's based on trauma. It's based on wounds, really hard experiences that person went through. And so I think it's much more effective for ourselves and for that person to take a compassionate approach, but really partner that with a boundaried approach, like being clear on our boundaries, have a deadline for what we, for how long we'll work if the needle's not moving. And as long as the other person's on the same page with working, in my personal opinion, and seeing so many people go through this, I think some of the most beautiful things come out of having insecure attachment styles and then both parties showing up to the table to do the work. It is like so profound. I've had so many couple sessions where I'm like, oh, don't cry, because it's so beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
And people open and learn and grow. And so there's some magical stuff that happens from there for sure.
Yeah. And I think equally meaningful and powerful is when we do show up for ourselves and the other person can't meet us there, and we don't cave, and we continue to honor our needs. I think can be just as powerful, really.
Absolutely. And until we show up for ourselves and like look inwards, because I know some people will be like, oh, it's all the dismissive avoidant. They're so difficult, and it's like, no. We have a part too. And our job in integrity to ourselves and relationship to ourselves is to show up for all of our part, not because of trying to benefit somebody else, not because of trying to like walk on eggshells for somebody else, but because in doing that, we learn, we grow, we heal. And it's only through that learning and growing and healing that we get truly empowered to be clear about our boundaries and to be able to say, you know what? I'm clear about myself now. I know what my needs are. This isn't working, and I'm going to honor that. But we can't do that without some first introspection, self-awareness, and noticing our patterns and doing the healing work on our part.
Yeah. You mentioned personality needs, and I know I mentioned personality needs when I was sharing my story too. I'm curious if you can overview the 6 basic needs, the 45 core personality needs.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a really profound part of our identity. And I think a lot of insecure attachment styles, really all 3 and for different reasons and in different ways, often don't know their needs. The dismissive avoidance can seem like they know their needs, but they often know like their survival-based needs. Like I need space, I need safety, and it's really coming from a fight or flight space.
Yeah.
Their actual like emotional needs, their identity is often repressed. And that can be, because they're so focused on safety and they're living in fight or flight. And then for fearful avoidance, you can lose your self-identity because you can easily get enmeshed with the people around you. And for anxious preoccupied, they're so externally focused on people outside of them that they often don't know how to identify and really get clear on their sense of self. And so I developed a system based on Tony Robbins' 6 basic human needs and the research of teleology, which is sort of like our internal value system. And basically we have our 6 basic human needs, and these are things we're all wired for. And so these are things like growth, significance, contribution, certainty, uncertainty, and love and connection. And from here, we develop strategies to get these basic needs met. And you can think of those needs as being like rooted deeply in the unconscious. Like these are our natural impulses and what we're wired for almost biologically to a certain degree. And then from that, in the more subconscious mind, we have strategies that we try to get those needs met. So for example, let's say growing up, Bob has lots of, I like the name Bob.
Yeah.
Bob has a lot of negative associations to building love and connection with peers. Maybe he doesn't feel like he connects that well. Maybe he doesn't feel like he knows how to navigate those relationships that effectively, but he gets a lot of his love and connection needs met from his family. And maybe that's a safe space for him. So what we might see is Bob might go on he builds all these positive associations to family and not so much to peers. And so that develops a personality need, which becomes part of his sense of self. And then he might go on in his adult life to call himself a family man. And he might always plan his Sunday dinners with his family and really value family and talk about family a lot and all these different things. So our personality needs are basically our needs that have the most positive over negative associations as strategies to get our 6 basic human needs met. And they really create who we are. And our subconscious mind is constantly looking to fill these buckets with or without our awareness. And if we don't know what these things are, we don't know what to say yes and no to largely. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, I'll go do something that I'm not actually that interested in, but my subconscious will pull me away in a different direction. And we also get into a space where it's like, we don't know how to express what we need. We don't know how to express what matters to us in relationships. And if we don't know who we are and we don't know how to bring those needs into a relationship, you can bet that the relationship is not going to be nearly as fulfilling as it could be.
Yeah.
So I won't go through like all the personality needs, but these are things like all the positive strategies we use to meet those 6 basic human needs. So you might see family, emotional connection, social connection, things like community, for the love and connection needs. You might see things like for significance, people valuing power, attention, approval, things like this, acknowledgement, achievement. And then basically you'd go through these 6 needs and you can see, for certainty or safety, you might have people who are wanting order, structure, organization, safety in and of itself. So basically it's like these parts of us that are very strong that we use to navigate our world, but it's actually based on us just trying to get these basic human needs met through ways that have worked for us over time.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, we're going to go into this a little later when we talk about breakups, but it's so tempting and easy when you develop a strong connection to think it's about the person versus the needs that they're meeting.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest ways that we connect to others is it's one of the biggest forefrontal factors that creates attraction at the subconscious level is this person meeting my personality needs? And the example I often give to people is it's like, let's say you go for a walk and you sit down on a park bench and you meet somebody, and let's say they want to talk with you about personal growth and emotional connection and relationships, things that I imagine show up in your personality needs.
Yeah.
You might sit down and be like, oh my gosh, I met the best person on the park bench.
Yeah.
And you like feel so inspired and it lights your day up a little bit. And what's actually happening is somebody's filling up your buckets of your personality needs, which makes you feel empowered and safe and that these basic human needs are being met. And you can compare that to sitting down and somebody's talking to you about like math or numbers, or maybe something that feels dry to you as somebody who really values emotional connection and depth.
Yeah.
And you might be like, oh my God, I need to leave this park bench.
Yeah.
That stranger wasted 30 minutes of my day. And so it's really about like, are our needs being met at that level? And we can identify those things and then bring them into a relationship and be clear about what somebody else's are. It's so important and empowering in a relationship dynamic, because without that, it's like we're like a chicken with our head cut off, like running around trying to get needs met and not even knowing what they are or where they're coming from.
Yeah. And you have a course specifically on personality needs. And I feel like if you are, whether you're solo or in a partnership, it could be a beautiful exercise to do with a partner to get a better sense, and a beautiful exercise just for you to do yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to say one last thing about it is often we'll see people and they can be trying to give love to somebody else through their personality needs. And I would say it's actually more impactful than our love languages.
Yeah.
And somebody, I myself, I have such a strong personality need around personal growth. And I spend a long time like giving people tickets to workshops and like personal growth books and like doing all these things, being so excited about sharing these things, and then feeling like the person didn't go to the friggin' workshop, they never read the book. And it's because without that awareness, I was giving love through my personality needs, but it's like throwing a baseball to somebody and they don't want to catch it. And it doesn't land. And so, sometimes we can feel disempowered, or we can feel like somebody's not receiving love, or somebody else in a relationship with us can be giving love that's bouncing off of us and we don't realize. And so it really helps to like put those things into perspective.
Yeah. Esther has this famous quote from her first book. We now go to one person what we used to go to an entire community for. And so, someone might say, I love my partner, but he doesn't meet a lot of my core personality needs. And I think that's the opportunity to see other ways to get them met, because you obviously have this connection that you want to protect that's important to you. I think so often, like with this romanticism ideal, we think, oh, this one person has to meet all of the needs.
Yes.
And it can be great to find different sources for that.
100%. And what I've seen as well is that most people don't have partners who have all the exact same personality needs. What I find is usually, on average, I would say in relationships, it's like people share one or two big ones, and that's beautiful. But then we have to be conscientious about somebody's other needs and make some space for them. Like, if your partner wants to talk to you about Let's say in theory, you have somebody who wants to talk to you about something you're disinterested in, you might want to hold that space because it's still a form of emotional connection. You might want to try to be present. And then also on sort of the flip side, if we see that, okay, these three needs are just not going to be met in my relationship that well because they're not natural to another person or they're not programmed into another person, then you can have really empowering strategies to support yourself in those arenas outside of your relationship and then still feel fulfilled. And that's really what fulfillment is. Fulfillment largely has to do with, are our personality needs buckets filled up? And that's when we feel fulfilled. And that's when our mind becomes more still.
I love that. So speaking of a still mind, so we're going to do a first. We've never done this before on a Facebook Live. We're going to bring in an anonymous group member. So her camera's going to be turned off and she has a question. I get a lot of DMs. I'm sure you do as well. And she asked me a question like, oh, this would be perfect for Thais. And I asked her if she was comfortable coming on just audio only. And I asked you, and you guys were both open to that and excited about it. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll call her Delia. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Miss Delia into stream. Hold on. And I will also preface reading her story just to kind of lay the groundwork. Okay, so let's see. Guys, let us know in the comments if the audio is good as soon as she starts talking, but here's the background information. So I ended an abusive relationship after 3 years. It ended with filing a complaint to the police. It was very bad. He wanted to control everything, basically for me to stay at home, cook, have babies, even though I told him repeatedly that I wasn't ready to. I had all the calmness in the world and explained to him that those things were not okay. I also tried to change, but it didn't matter. In the end, I left. I just needed some air and peace of mind. It hit me that he was actually very much like my father in terms of his temperament with all the endless fights that I used to have back home. How do I stop caring for him? We have been separated for 5 months. There are days when I know I made the right choice and days when I miss him like crazy. When we broke up, he threatened me and cursed my family. I know he's a hurt person and he overreacted, so I forgave him. And I acknowledged the lessons. And now I still miss him a lot. I'm scared because on a daily basis, I try to read, learn, do a lot, but when I go to sleep, I cry. I'm just so tired. How can I reprogram this attraction?
Yeah, so, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Delia, can you say hello just so we make sure the audio is good?
Sure, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, perfect.
It's such an honor to be here. Thank you, Thais. Thank you, Leah. Thanks.
Thanks, Delia.
So this is my story.
Thank you for being here and for sharing yourself with everybody. And I think it's a really powerful share because this is, so I'll do like a little overview first and we'll boil it down. So there's 3 major things that create attraction. So these are somebody meeting deeply unmet needs that we have. And the more those needs are unmet, the more profound the attraction will be because your mind wants homeostasis. That's a part of a survival mechanism. So when somebody meets something where a bucket has been empty, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is my source of this. And so the mind can, in a sense, be addicted to that at the subconscious level. So there's that one piece. The second piece, and you mentioned this, is a subconscious comfort zone. So your subconscious mind is very survival and safety oriented. And so if you have an experience where, somebody reminds you of dad and somebody reminds you of fighting in the home and things like that, your subconscious mind is like, well, we survived those experiences. So those are working for us. And this is what love is. And so this is great for me. And it actually tries to bond you to what it thinks is going to help you stay alive and survive. So your subconscious didn't go like, oh, that felt scary or dangerous. Your subconscious went, that worked because we survived. So check off the box. And then you're attracted to those things. And the third thing that creates attraction, specifically at the subconscious level, is, and this is a really profound one, is the traits that somebody expresses that you're repressing. And the reason for this, again, is your brain wants homeostasis. So your brain will literally if there's traits repressed in you, like let's say speaking up or setting boundaries or being assertive, maybe you've repressed that. And maybe he really expresses that because he does that and he's really intense that way. Your subconscious mind is going to go, oh, I'll get wholeness through him, and wholeness equals homeostasis and safety and survival. And it will try to bond with and bind to, in a sense, traits that we're repressing within us. And so the biggest ways that we can overcome this, and keep in mind too, there's some intermittent reinforcement with this person, which can also be a bit addictive. Like the hot and cold can create this sort of addictive, it's like gambling, and gamblers get addicted to like the maybe it'll be a good outcome and maybe not, and so that intermittency can create a lot of dopamine responses.
Can you share the rat example?
Yeah. So there's an experiment that was done by researchers, I think in the early 2000s, and they basically put these food pellets into these little machines that the rat could push a lever, and the food pellet would come out, and they set it up in a few different ways. So the first way was every time the rat would push a food pellet, the food would come out, and then the rats would be like, yay, that's fantastic, and go back to resuming life. And then they set it up where they would just stop emitting the food pellets, and the rats would sort of hang around there and keep pushing the lever and eventually be like, okay, it's not working, and go back and resume life, even though it took a little bit of testing the food lever. And then as a third option, and what they were testing was the power of intermittency and the effects that it had, they would put the food pellets in really randomly. So every 20th time, every 60th time, every 110th time. And what they found is that rats literally stopped grooming, stopped bathing, stopped connecting with other rats. And they would just, like little addicts, like hover around the food pellet and give up on their life essentially, and just keep pushing the lever, like, so repetitively, because that intermittency impacts the brain that way. And so sometimes when we have somebody who can be, abusive in a relationship, it does the same thing. And that can be sometimes related to trauma bonding, Stockholm syndrome, all these different dynamics where it's that intermittency compared to that lack of warmth, lack of connection that can be such a draw, because it's like a slot machine win for somebody. It's like, oh my gosh, we finally got the prize, and it can create this addictive component. So overall, between the intermittency and those 3 attraction features, those are going to be the root subconscious reasons that you're drawn to this person. And so what it requires is learning what those deeply unmet needs are from him that are not being met in your own life, and then working to meet those needs through self and through others, so that your subconscious doesn't see him as the source of that and doesn't addict to him as a means of getting those needs met. It's also going to require getting really clear about what those traits are inside of yourself that are repressed, that he was expressing, and then working to really empower those traits in a healthy way and integrate them into like a balanced form, so that you have wholeness on your own and your subconscious mind doesn't try to get it through him. And then it's also going to require getting clear about that subconscious comfort zone that you have for what love is, and to recognize, and this is like, hopefully it's not too much information, but to recognize that for our subconscious comfort zone to exist still after all these years after childhood, what that means is that we have to be keeping that alive on some level. And that means if dad was critical when he was fighting, you must still be critical in relationship to self and your internal dialogue. You have to have been doing something without realizing, and this is common for everybody. It's a form of re-traumatization. It's a form of, we kept firing and wiring those same neural pathways that we experienced as a result of those traumatic events in childhood. And that's the only way that comfort zone is still alive now, because otherwise, if we weren't doing that, it would have atrophied and it would no longer exist. And so we have to change and really transform those patterns that lead to an unhealthy subconscious comfort zone in relationship to self, which then make us feel like that person is safe because it's familiar and it's a match outside of us. Does that all make sense, Delia? Okay, so I'm having a tiny bit of difficulty hearing, so I just want to repeat back to you so I know that I heard you correctly. So I think I heard you say that he brought you this sense of security and he brought you a sense of being seen. Were those the 2 things that you identified?
Yes.
Excellent. So here's what's often happening. We want to look first if something is really important to us outside of us. We know that it's feedback. It's like a golden nugget. We know that there's feedback that something is unmet within us. And it can be for one of 2 reasons. It can be that we're not actively meeting that thing in the way that we were receiving it, like in that exact form. And I'll explain that in a second. Or it can be that we have a hole in our bucket because we're actively sabotaging that need. So for example, with being seen, sometimes people will be like, I'm trying to see myself. I'm trying to, do these things. But really being seen is about emotional intimacy. It's about presence. And there's a big difference between things like being seen and checking in with ourselves quickly, or like trying to go into the career option that we want, or trying to do some personal growth work, versus like actual seeing ourselves, sitting down with a journal. What did we feel today? What did we need? What are we experiencing? And being like super present. And the act of doing that repetitively also builds this aspect of trust at the subconscious level, which is, then your brain learns it can rely on itself to meet those needs. So there can be like a lack of the actual fully seeing and giving that emotional intimacy, but there can also be a hole in the bucket. So it can also be that, I might be working towards doing that and showing up and seeing myself, but if I stop seeing myself altogether and I don't set boundaries and I don't speak up and communicate the moment I'm around people, then I still have a hole in my bucket and it's draining, because everything I'm putting in, I'm sort of undoing by the moment I'm around people or the moment I'm busy or something like that. So you really want to look for, is there something that's taking away from the need? And then how can I fill that need in the most effective way possible? So I would look for that in terms of being seen. And I would also look for, in terms of safety or security that he provided, like, where do I provide security for myself and how can I empower that further? But also, where am I, without noticing, taking away my own security? Am I thinking of worst case scenarios in life a lot? Am I looking for things in my internal dialogue that make me feel unsafe? Am I, telling people stories about things that make me feel a sense of lack of safety? Am I watching the news on an ongoing basis and it makes me feel unsafe? So you want to look for the holes in your bucket, but then also the most empowering strategies to fill your bucket. But I'm also going to guess, just based on what you said, that there's more in the traits for you than in the needs. So I would also try to get really clear about writing out the traits that he expressed and the ones that you were really attracted to, or even the ones you really didn't like, because any intense emotional charge is showing you part of your shadow. And those are the traits that you really want to work on empowering so that you feel whole and filled within yourself. And I've done this work with so many people. And literally, the moment people feel like they can really meet their own needs, integrate their traits, and they've done that work and it starts to take hold at a subconscious level because there's a little bit of repetition, literally, it's like somebody waved a magic wand and they go, yeah, I just like felt like I don't really feel attracted to this person anymore. And it's so important for feeling. So do you know what those traits are as well? So you're saying that you find yourself as like a people pleaser a lot, and you feel like, oh, I have to go fix it one more time. And also that the traits that he had is that he was very sure of himself, very confident. So what you would do with this is you would write out, like, what are some strategies I can practice? Because it's a repetition plus emotion that reprograms the subconscious. So you would sit down and you would go, what are some strategies that I can use daily to be better with my boundaries, to speak up more, to become more confident? And how can I practice that on a daily basis? And you pick something that works for your life. So for example, I'll practice in very small increments, speaking up more and identifying my boundaries. It's so important to feel seen by yourself to be able to set boundaries. We feel so unseen if we're dismissing our own boundaries. Like, imagine what that's like from somebody outside of you. If you have a friend following you around all day and every time you have a boundary, they're like, no, don't say anything. Nobody cares. Don't bother. Don't go there. It's like, oh my gosh, you think I'm so unworthy. And so then we'll really, when people express that worth or express those boundaries, we're going to feel so attracted to it and so drawn towards that. So it's such important feedback for you. And so I would really get clear and take some time with it, like sit for 30, 40 minutes. And what are the traits? What are these qualities in him that I was so attracted to, and what are strategies I can use to start integrating those things into my own life on a daily basis? And then again, what are those needs and how can I start showing up for those in myself? And you mentioned wanting to fix it again, wanting to try again. And I would ask too, like, what's the meaning you give to the situation if you don't fix it? What do you make it mean about you if you don't fix it? And what comes up for you? So this might be like, oh, I'm unworthy, I failed, things like that. What meaning do you give to not trying to fix it? There's two other things that are really important. And this isn't about attraction and what keeps pulling you back, but it's about the core wounds and beliefs you're carrying about yourself. So there's two in there. One is what you make it mean about you. Is she gone?
No, I'm going to close up the interactive part. So we'll make this the last response.
Oh, okay, perfect. So you can identify like what you make it mean about yourself. So I think you said you feel a lot of guilt and shame. So sometimes that can be, I am bad, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. Like, and you need to question that story and equilibrate it. You need to work on seeing the other side of it, and that will create emotional relief. So if you go, why am I good enough? Why was it good enough to leave? Why was it right to leave? Why is it important for me to leave? Instead of just looking at the downsides, your subconscious mind might try to gravitate you back towards some old story you carry at a subconscious level about yourself. You want to really work to question that and find pieces of evidence on the other side so it'll lose its emotional charge. And the other piece is, I'm a failure for leaving. I would look at, why would it be a failure to stay? And maybe because I totally disown myself. I totally don't acknowledge my sense of self-worth. And the more pieces of evidence and the more reasons you can put into that, the more relief you'll also feel, because right now your subconscious is like pulling you in a direction that says you're a failure if you left or you didn't fix it. And that is not true. And so you want to have pieces of evidence, because that's the language of the subconscious mind. It responds to evidence.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Delia. I'm really excited to regroup with you in our Saturday group and hear the work that you're doing and the progress that you're experiencing. So thanks so much for sharing your story. I've been seeing in the comments how much it's been helping other people in the group as well. So we'll catch you soon. Let's see. Okay, so Thais, you had mentioned in your response to Delia, shadow work. Can you share a little bit about what shadow work is? And there was a similar question that was asked by Pablo. What are core wounds and how do they affect our relationships?
Yes. Okay, beautiful. So I'll start with the core wounds because it'll pull into shadow work a little bit. So core wounds, basically what I've boiled down is that there's roughly like 22 core wounds that we experience. And what these are like categories of emotional imprints. They're meaning we give to situations that we couldn't properly emotionally process. So for example, let's say that you're a child and let's say that you are singing in front of your mom. And let's say your mom had a really hard day and she's like, stop, your voice is so annoying. And let's say, that's such a painful experience to process as a little kid, even though your mom just thinks, oh, she, lost her cool for a second and said something kind of rude. For you as a child, that's like probably a devastating experience.
Yeah.
And so when we get these emotional imprints that are painful, our subconscious, out of trying to keep us safe, says, oh my gosh, we have to store this and remember this so that we don't do this again and we don't get hurt this way again.
Yeah.
And so it gives meaning to things. And these meanings become part of our personality. So we might make that mean that I'm not good enough. We might make that mean that I'm unworthy. We could make it mean so many different things. If somebody leaves, or we have a parent abandon, or if we have a divorce, or, then we give meaning to those things too. Like I'm abandoned, or I will be abandoned. I am unsafe. I am alone. I am unloved. So we have these core categories of meaning that form this subconscious story we carry about ourselves. And the reason that rejection hurts, the reason that, things are really, really painful in our adult lives is usually because they're touching these core wounds. So I won't go through all of them, but some really common ones are, I am trapped, I am helpless, I am powerless, I am unloved, I am unimportant, I don't matter, I don't belong, I am excluded, I am disliked, I will be abandoned, I will be alone, things like this. And so they become these really core painful imprints. And then our mind is often in this state of reprojecting these things. Like we go into, let's say, a social event, and let's say we're carrying these wounds, I am disliked, or I will be rejected. Then we go into the social event and we're not fully present. We're probably interacting in a social event through the filter of these wounds. Like, oh my gosh, that person's judging me. That person's looking at me funny. What if this person doesn't like me? And those repetitive thought patterns that come off of those core wounds that are deep programs in the subconscious create repetitive emotions. How do you feel when you're thinking these things? Yeah. And so there's this whole like cascade of an internal reality that's taking place at the subconscious level that we might not even realize. We're like in the social event interacting, but feeling this like underlying anxiety or fear because those core wounds are activated. So they're really important to recognize and to, take inventory of. And then our shadow are these sort of traits, and they can be the result of some of these core wounds, but basically we build in these negative associations to parts of ourselves. So for example, This is shadow work specifically is Carl Jung's work. And basically he said that the shadow are the repressed parts or traits within ourselves, or even desires, because we've learned through society that these things are basically going to make us feel bad. So let's say you're a child, you are in a family with parents who think that it's silly to cry as a young man, let's say, and they might teach you that expressing emotions is bad. And so you repress your emotional availability, your emotional vulnerability into the subconscious, and it becomes part of the shadow. And what's so interesting is because the brain is seeking wholeness, you get these competing programs that pop up where it's like the need to like be vulnerable and express, but then this other part of you that's like, no, we've built negative associations. We need to keep that down. And so how you'll know that your shadow is activated is by the emotional charges you have around other people. So the moment you're judging somebody or you're triggered by somebody, chances are the trait that they're expressing is actually a trait that's repressed into your own subconscious mind that's trying to come up and sort of be integrated back into the whole. And so our shadow really, really impacts our relationship dynamics, because it has a lot to do with how we're triggered by other people, what frustrates us, and also the parts of ourselves that we've deemed unworthy of love.
Yeah.
And the denser our shadow is, the more we are going to feel unseen, unheard, unloved by others, because we'll show up in our relationships with only parts of ourselves showing. And that creates the breeding grounds to feel like love is conditional, because we've made love conditional within ourselves. And so there's a huge impact there as well.
So powerful. I have so many more questions, so I'm going to try to be speedy. So I'm curious if you can share some examples of healing using the conscious mind versus actually reprogramming the subconscious mind, and then the difference between pain and suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. So conscious mind healing, to be quite honest, you're always going to hit a bit of a wall if it's a subconscious program. And the reason for this is that the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
So if we have a program, like if we have a pattern, so this could be a core wound that we've carried, the story we've repeated about ourselves being not good enough or unworthy of love for years, no matter how much our conscious mind is like, we want to change this, unless we're actually acting in a way that aligns with the subconscious mind and doing work to reprogram, the conscious mind can hack and reprogram the subconscious, but it cannot outwill or overpower. So we can't be like, I don't want to say that anymore, and it just stops.
Yeah.
We have to do reprogramming work. So this is like the absolute necessity of taking the subconscious into consideration. We can do things on like a surface level, like try to set a boundary or try to speak up, but unless there's a repetition involved, we can only ever deal with something in the moment that we recognize it. We can't reprogram it so it stops coming back.
And what courses in the school, in your personal development school, do you have that would help with subconscious reprogramming?
Yeah, I would say the first one is the emotional mastery and belief reprogramming course. It gives you like a full inventory of how this works and what this is all about, and then tools to reprogram. And then we have a second course that's just a course on subconscious reprogramming, and it has 21 tools, and you can sort of dive in and pick which tools you like the most. And then it teaches you how to isolate what your patterns are so that you can just plug them into those tools and start doing the really deep work. So yeah, great question. Thank you. And then when we talk about pain and suffering, there's only two reasons that we emotionally experience pain or suffering. There's nothing outside of this. And I think sometimes the relationship we have to our emotions is like, oh, our emotions they're horrible. Like, we're having a sad day. This is awful. And we get frustrated by it, and we just like add more negative emotion to the mix. But every single time we feel negative emotion, it's a gift. It is a beautiful feedback mechanism, and our emotions never lie. And what it's always telling you is you're either experiencing pain, and pain is unmet needs. And this is a great thing, because if we didn't have pain when we had unmet needs, we wouldn't have like sought food and water and shelter and survived and evolved as a species. So pain is a really important feedback mechanism to let us know, hey, a need is unmet. But when we get into suffering is the story we make the unmet need mean. So for example, let's say one of my basic human needs of love and connection is unmet. Then I might feel pain, like kind of an ache or an emptiness or a hollowness that's like, hey, this doesn't feel so good. But if I then make it mean a core wound, if I make it mean I'm unlovable, or I'm going to be alone forever, or I start storytelling around that need, then I experience suffering. And suffering is like usually a little more excruciating. You're usually experiencing it above a 5 out of 10. And that's when you want to be able to recognize, wow, my emotions are giving me feedback that my thoughts and beliefs are hurting me. And I have to trace that inwards and go, what have I just been thinking, or what am I believing in this situation? And we have to work on questioning those stories so that they cannot stay alive. Because the moment those thoughts and stories are passing on autopilot, we are emotionally living in a reality where that's the absolute truth. So even if I'm not getting love and connection met, let's pretend that's happening, and let's pretend it's because it's quarantine and I can't see people. But if I'm telling the story, it's because I'm unlovable and I'm unworthy and nobody cares about me, then it's so painful. And I have to be able to go inwards and go, wait, is that 100% true? Can I really know that I'm unlovable and that nobody cares about me? Okay, who are the people that do care about me? Who are the people that do love me? And we have to work to question and equilibrate that story, and your emotions will transform as a result. You'll feel relief.
Thank you. Okay, the 3 areas I still want to cover are boundaries, breakups, and limerence. So I'm going to start with boundaries because I feel like it's the B word, comes up all the time in the group. So this is about laying a boundary versus enforcing a boundary with consequences. A group member shared she doesn't have trouble expressing her boundaries, but she has a lot of trouble enforcing boundary consequences. She said, she has more trouble expressing and enforcing them actually with certain people. So in the workplace and professional settings is a lot harder than with a romantic partner. Why is that? And what is the path to healing?
Great question. So the reason for that is the meaning you give to that situation. So you want to first isolate that meaning. So for example, I am afraid to set boundaries in the workplace because if I do, then what?
Yeah.
And you might go, I'll lose my job. I will become unsafe. I won't have money. So you want to uncover, and those are things that are basically there at a subconscious level, and you want to become consciously aware of them. So find the meaning you give to that situation. Okay. What do I make it mean if I do set a boundary? And then you want to work on questioning that meaning, really working to equilibrate that story. Like, can I 100% know that I'm going to lose my job the moment I set a boundary? So you want to start there by basically disidentifying from that meaning you're giving. Then the second piece is you want to start using something called exposure therapy, which is basically just this idea that you want to repetitively start doing this. You want to repetitively change the behavioral pattern just in small increments that feel safe. And then once you've done it, you want to intentionally create, because the subconscious is programmed through repetition plus emotion. So you want to repeat these actions, and you want to intentionally create a perspective for yourself once you've done it that makes you feel good. So for example, maybe you'll start by just setting a really small boundary with your closest coworker, like the lowest hanging fruit. And when you do it, you might be like, okay, that was okay. This worked. That was safe. I survived. I didn't lose my job. And you might try to think things like, that was powerful of me to do. I'm proud of myself for doing that. I felt courageous for doing that. And you're going to think thoughts that create emotional output, because that's what thoughts do, that build new positive associations to a place that you have these previously negative programs. And by doing that repetitively and then working up to being able to set bigger boundaries with more distant people, over time, you'll have transformed that entire program.
Thank you. That was actually another Saturday Women's Group question. So I'll make sure I'll tag her at the moment in the video. Okay, let's go to breakups. So you had said, when our needs aren't met, we obsess about the past and imagine the future. So many questions in the group are about loss and relationship endings. In your opinion, what is the path to healing from a breakup? Why are people so often drawn to return to painful experiences with people after they've broken up? And I'll just leave it at those 2.
Okay, beautiful. So the first question is, what is the path for people to heal from a breakup? Okay, beautiful. So I've written a whole course on this, but there's some really key parts. So what I always say to people is, when we're working with emotional problems, one of the first things we always want to do is specifically isolate the problem. If we're like, oh, the breakup hurts, we don't give ourselves anything tangible to work with. We want to be like, what about the breakup hurts? Why is it hurting me? And the more specific we get, the more we're actually going to discover these pieces of our subconscious mind and what's going on beneath the surface. So one of the biggest first reasons a breakup hurts is because of the meaning we give to a breakup. And I'll share this story really quickly. I worked with a woman, these 2 women once, and I saw them on the same day, and they were both getting a divorce. They were the same age. They had kids very close in age, and they came in one after another. And their experiences were very similar. And one woman was like, oh, I'm going to be okay. This is going to be rough, but I'll be fine. And the other woman was like in pure devastation, like earth shattering devastation.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference was that the first woman was going, it wasn't working. This was painful. It's going to be challenging, but I believe it's for the best. And I trust myself to be able to navigate this. And she was like almost looking forward to being able to shift. And the other woman, her meaning when she came in and I asked her, like, what do you make this mean? She was like, I'm going to be alone forever. If he didn't, love is forever. So if he doesn't want to stay with me, then he never loved me. And like the stories, the meaning she was giving was so painful. And so of course she was in so much more suffering. And so one of the first things we want to do is isolate the meaning we give to a breakup. What do we make it mean about us? It's going to be a reflection of what core subconscious wounds we already have. And then we want to work to really question those stories. And we want to remind ourselves to oppose those stories on a regular basis so that it repatterns the subconscious mind. Because again, that repetition plus emotion reprograms. So for example, if you're making the breakup mean you're unworthy, you're going to be alone forever, you are abandoned, you're unsafe in the world, you're not good enough, all these different things, we have to really work to question those stories and equilibrate them. So that's part one. Part two, our mind does this thing as well where it holds on to, sort of like we were mentioning with Delia, the needs that person met. And the subconscious mind is always concerned about the fastest way to get its needs met because it's survival based, not the best way. And so sometimes what we do is the brain's like, well, that was working. Those needs were getting met over there. So it keeps trying to hang on to that person and it prevents our ability to move forward. So we have to create some really conscious strategies and we have to remind ourselves repetitively, hey, that person's not meeting our needs. There are downsides to this. We want to look at those downsides with that person. And we want to have new healthy strategies to get our needs met from ourselves or from other healthy people in our lives. And then the last two pieces, there's a lot in here, but the last two pieces are the traits. It's going to be that same thing. We hunger for that trait equilibration. Yeah. And so if somebody's expressing traits that we were repressing, isolate them. What are they? What was making you so attracted to that person? How can I work to become more whole through integrating those traits in my own life? Yeah. So if it was not speaking up, great. Where am I going to start speaking up on a daily basis? And every time we do this, you're going to feel the needle move and the relief from that attraction or limerence-based feeling towards that ex-partner. And the very last thing is we have to look at the upsides of the breakup. And it's hard, but we know that every single decision the mind makes consciously plus subconsciously is because it perceives more benefits than drawbacks. So we know there's actually a net positive here. And that's why we broke up. We saw more value in either saying okay to the breakup and leaving it alone, or in doing the breaking up ourselves. And so we have to be able to look for, okay, what's going to come in the future? How is this going to serve me? What do I get to let go of that no longer was serving? And we have to look for the upsides and focus our attention and intentions on that.
Perfect. Last question about limerence. I loved your limerence webinar, by the way. That was really enlightening because I have such a strong fantasy life and imagination. I always have since as early as I can remember. And I tend to get very caught up in limerence. So was curious to hear what might cause attraction to become limerence or rumination. And what's the connection between our attachment styles and our propensity to be in limerence?
Wow, great questions. You have fantastic questions. Okay, so there's quite a bit to unpack here, but I would say the first piece is limerence is basically excessive infatuation where we can get really, really connected to somebody. Limerence always happens. It's those same factors that create attraction that we keep going back to. So the traits, the needs, the subconscious comfort zone. And it's really relative to how many needs are unmet that the person's meeting and how empty those buckets were. So if we have somebody, let's say somebody's meeting our needs for connection and let's say emotional connection. And let's say we haven't found somebody to really intimately make us feel seen and heard and connected to for years. When somebody meets that, it's going to be like crack. It's oh my gosh, this is huge. And it's such a strong pull, it's a crazy feeling for people. And so how unmet the bucket is and then how many buckets there are that are unmet is going to be exactly in correlation with how strong the attraction is and how strong that pull is. So when we experience limerence, if we do, it's really important feedback for us. Oh, there's some holes in us in a way, not actual holes, but there's, these really big missing parts. And so we want to use that information and go, okay, great. what do I need to start filling on my own? And to be quite honest, limerence relationships are rarely successful. Limerence relationships usually are most successful when we are actually actively meeting those needs for ourselves, balancing ourselves out. We become whole, and then we can attract from a space of wholeness.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, limerence also comes with tons of expectations. We're like, this person's supposed to be my drug dealer of these needs.
Yeah.
This person's supposed to be, and we put somebody on such a pedestal, and that creates a lot of friction in relationship dynamics. So it's the needs, it's the traits. How much am I repressing parts of myself that person's expressing? Same thing. And then the subconscious comfort zone is sort of less so. But is somebody treating us like there's this mirror that takes place in relationships? If we're really attracted to somebody, it can be because somebody's treating us the way we treat ourselves. So if that's in a good way, that's beautiful, but that's likely going to be more secure.
Yeah.
And if it's in a not so good way, wow, where are we doing this to ourselves? So if it's somebody dismissive avoidant, where am I dismissing myself, my own feelings, my own needs, and that allows me to feel this pull towards somebody that's treating me that way? Is this feeling I feel towards somebody, is it something that I need to move forward with love, or is it something in me that I need to heal?
Yeah.
And it's a really important question to ask ourselves. And then relative to attachment and limerence, the really quick overview I'll give is dismissive avoidance often feel limerence around people that are safe. So often dismissive avoidance will, it's so interesting, but they can often feel like limerence towards like television characters, actors, actresses, because it's sort of like this person meets my needs, but without challenging that core wound of safety.
Yeah.
So it's like you get into these rich fantasy worlds with actors and things like that. Fearful avoidance can experience the same thing, but usually because they value deep emotional connection so much, it only ever so much hits a point. A lot of fearful avoidance, when they experience limerence, it's because literally somebody's made them feel really seen, really safe, really understood, given them like attention in a way that's deep and meaningful. And for anxious preoccupied, it's the promise of being wanted, the promise of being catered to and loved and worshipped, and all these things that they feel are really important to have that consistency and depth of connection and relationship. So there's different underlying reasons associated with different attachment styles that can pull you into differences.
I can so relate to the fearful avoidant one in such a powerful way. I know you have a hard stop in about 5 minutes. I want to make sure you have time for a bathroom break, because I know how these things go.
I'm okay.
But before we let you go, I would love for you to share a little bit about your offerings, so that if people are interested in exploring any of these topics that we covered, they know where to go.
Awesome. Yeah. So we have the Personal Development School, and it has over 30 different courses on boundaries, on overcoming people pleasing, reprogramming your attachment style, understanding your subconscious mind, like all these topics we talked about. There's pretty much a course for all of them. And I do 4 live webinars a week with the students. So I'm there and answering questions and connecting and doing all that stuff also. And then you get access to the webinar library with over 100 different webinars. So there's tons of stuff on there. We have an attachment style quiz on the website as well, if you're interested. And it comes with like a full report and a video of your attachment style and how it works, just to do that sort of deeper awareness work. And then also we have a whole bunch of free content on YouTube that I'm always putting up as well.
Amazing. And you have a 25% offer going on now, right?
Yes, we do. Yes. So the coupon code is with you. It's all one word. And it's for membership bundles. And so we're doing that during sort of like the crazy COVID time. And so you are welcome to join in there and use that coupon code as well.
Great. And what I found super meaningful is when you become a member, you basically have unlimited access to everything. So you have unlimited access to all 30 courses. My favorite are the webinars and the interactive Q&As. And there's oodles of those, as well as additional resources. So for me, it's just been so tremendously helpful, and like really one of my favorite parts of my week to look forward to, especially the interactive Q&As. So I'm just so grateful for you, Thais, for showing up in the world the way that you do, and for being so of service. I know you've kind of like caught like wildfire in our community, and people are really appreciating everything that you're sharing and doing.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being like an amazing community member and for bringing me on here and sharing everything. And you are also doing really beautiful work in the world and helping educate people in so many different ways. And I think that's phenomenal. So thank you. This has been so much fun. I really enjoy this. And I appreciate you a lot.
Great. Well, I'll catch you soon. I think tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Thais.
Have an
Bye.
amazing day. Bye. Bye.